She's gonna try to take me to Dunkin' Donuts. She's like veering over, not now, because she likes to go to Dunkin'. And she knows that I like to go to Dunkin', right?
Joycey Gordillo is your average college student who happens to have a not-so-average sidekick.
She prefers Starbucks, I think, because she gets a pop cup from them.
Meet Junie, Joycey's guide dog and her best friend, ready to help her take on everything that comes with being a college student.
Frat party, Junie. Yeah.
From frat parties to class to her job as an emergency room coordinator, Junie helps Joycey navigate a world not necessarily designed with the blind in mind.
You know, I feel more confident and safer walking because I know that she's looking out for me.
Being legally blind doesn't keep Joycey from living her life. It just makes navigating this major city more challenging than for her sighted peers.
Some of the challenges of travel is having to rely on a schedule. I can't just, out and about, head out of my house and be like, I'm gonna go to Boston right this second. I can't do that.
Once she's made it to her destination, she also has to navigate the city's brick sidewalks, old buildings, narrow streets, and at times, misunderstandings about the needs of people with disabilities.
When I turned 16, I had a teacher ask me if I was going to get my driver's license. So I said, I don't think they want me on the road. Everybody enjoyed that one.
While she can laugh at most things, the gap in accessibility of the city can have grave consequences. She's had to fight for classroom accommodations, has been denied entry into a restaurant, and says she was even hit by a car while crossing the street.
Certain places, Beacon Hill was actually the last neighborhood in Boston to put in wheelchair ramps, incidentally, and my predecessor had to fight tooth and nail to get them installed because there was a belief that it would damage the historic character of the neighborhood, to which my response was, frankly, swap out your Mercedes for a horse and buggy, and then we'll talk about the historic character of the neighborhood.
Colin Killick is the executive director of the Disability Policy Consortium, a research and advocacy organization in Boston.
Museums, right? Generally, accessibility is pretty good. Or things like the Common, the Public Garden, right? A fair amount of work is done into accessibility there.
But he stresses that employment and housing remain major barriers, especially for people with disabilities.
Yeah, I think in this market, it's sort of affordable, accessible, pick one.
That's partially because much of the city's public housing stock was built before the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990.
Under current state law, a new building, every unit has to be either fully wheelchair accessible or adaptable. And adaptable basically means that you could make it fully accessible without knocking down any walls. Under state law, if you're renovating a building, even if you're only leaving the facade standing, even if you're gutting it, even if you're turning a factory into an apartment building, those adaptability requirements don't kick in, and 95% of those units can be left totally inaccessible.
Killick says affordable, accessible housing is limited, and for many in the disability community, the cost of new accessible housing is wildly out of reach. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, the unemployment rate of people with disabilities is more than double the rate for people without disabilities.
As we know, the AMI, annual median income in this city, is extremely high. And an average person on Social Security income would make about 15% of the AMI. 15%. That's a problem.
Colleen Flanagan is the City of Boston's Disabilities Commission's outreach and engagement specialist. As someone who uses a wheelchair, she knows the city's growth and its lingering challenges well. Flanagan agrees. Housing and employment remain some of the biggest barriers to closing the gap.
Because many of our housing developments include stairs or elevators that are very, very old and almost impossible to fix. Those barriers create immense problems for people with disabilities, and just one of the reasons why most of our unhoused population are people with disabilities.
New housing that gets city funding has to make 10% of units fully accessible. That's 5% more than the state requirement. But let's look at what those units might cost. According to Apartments.com, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Boston is around $3,400. That's $40,000 a year. But according to the U.S. Department of Labor, the annual median income for someone with a disability in Massachusetts is just $26,000.
There needs to be new, affordable housing that actually gets built, because we can't have this choice between crumbling housing that's affordable and accessible housing that's only for the rich.
But let's say someone is able to afford one of these apartments. It might come at the expense of some long-term medical care. Killick says only Medicaid can provide disability care or equipment on a long-term basis. Make too much money and you lose SSI and the Medicaid benefits, but you might also not make enough to pay for them out of pocket.
It's ridiculous that, in a country that preaches, oh, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that we put people in a position where they have to choose between earning more money and keeping access to the healthcare that keeps them alive and out of a nursing home.
And for many people, like Joycey, proximity to accessible public transit is vital. She currently lives at home outside the city and needs to get a ride to her commuter rail station. She says it's hard to find a place downtown that's affordable and near her work, school, and friends.
So it really is not up to me. I'm at the will of the MBTA.
We need to be somewhere that we're not right now. We need more accessible housing. We need to build more. A lot of people want to live here, as they should. But we got to make sure that that includes people with disabilities.
People living in this city can be displaced very quickly. Very quickly.
Ed Pazanese says he has epilepsy and counts himself as fortunate to be living in the Forbes building in Jamaica Plain. For decades, it operated with a low-interest mortgage program, providing affordable housing for elderly and disabled residents. But that program recently expired, meaning rent could rise to market value. Right now, the city and state are considering a new proposal by the owners to limit rent and possibly subsidize costs. But that left Pazanese worried about housing stability for people like him.
I think of homelessness as a national and international concern, that it needs to be addressed better. But I also feel that people with disabilities and elders as well, they need a home.
That concern is partly what brought Pazanese to the city's Disability Community Forum at Suffolk University downtown, an event hosted by Boston's Commission for People with Disabilities and the Boston Disability Commission Advisory Board. The hybrid-style meeting offered Zoom attendance, sign language interpreters, and live transcriptions. Joycey and Junie happened to wander in on their way to the library.
Someone came and found me, asked me if I was looking for the Disability Forum, and I said, no, but I am now. And I got to make a lot of connections, which was a very unexpected but great way to spend the time I had allocated for studying so I could procrastinate further.
In addition to coming in clutch for Joycey, the city's disability commissioner uses this annual meeting to address frequently asked questions and solicit fresh ones from the community.
I always like to say that Boston is an old city. We're a vertical city, we're a winter city, and we're a crowded city. So we have a lot of baked-in challenges.
Kristen McCosh is the city's disability commissioner. As a wheelchair user, injured before the ADA was passed, she says Boston has come a long way, particularly in public transportation.
First of all, we need it to be functioning, but when it is functioning, it is really accessible. I believe like 95% of the subway stations are fully accessible. 100% of the buses are accessible.
But Boston still has room to grow, and housing is a priority.
Price is always an issue. Availability is always an issue. Waiting lists for the Boston Housing Authority are really long. The lottery has a lot more applicants than units available, so it's definitely a challenge that we continue to work on.
Today, she says the city is looking at zoning changes to encourage housing development. So far, the Squares and Streets initiative has added 6 new zoning districts. They prioritize mixed-use buildings, good transit service, lots of pedestrian activity, and outdoor amenity spaces. Meanwhile, the city has up to $15 million from the state to encourage developers to turn unused office space into housing. According to the city, applications they've received so far propose an additional 400 units across 13 buildings. And these are efforts McCosh says can benefit more than just the disability community.
We like to say we want it to be accessible for heels and wheels. So people who are walking across brick, they may have a suitcase, they may have a stroller, they may not be in a wheelchair, but we want it to be accessible for everybody. So it's the best city it can be.
Massachusetts also has a unique tool in its Architectural Access Board, a state office overseeing building code related to accessibility. McCosh explains it's more stringent than the widely used International Building Code.
The fact that we have a state agency that's dedicated to accessibility is really a wonderful tool for all cities in the state to use, because people can file complaints with them, and it's direct access, whereas if you want to file an ADA complaint, it goes through the feds. It's a much more involved and slower process.
But her personal point of pride is the accessibility checklist developers in Boston must use at the beginning of building design.
So the good thing is it doesn't impose any new requirements. It just basically gives us a snapshot of the accessibility of the project, and it makes developers think at the beginning of the project what accessibility is going to be. Because a lot of times we would see something that we didn't like and they'd say, well, it's already planned, it's already built, we can't change it now. So we're saying at the beginning of the project, think about it, and then there's no excuse why it can't happen. Because if it's new development, it can always be made accessible.
Particularly people with any kind of limitation get so overwhelmed by the amount of energy and effort to make the world work better for them. Part of what we're looking at is people who don't have to think about that stuff or waste their time anymore.
Valerie Fletcher is the executive director of the Institute for Human-Centered Design, a Boston-based research and consulting group focused on inclusivity.
It is always about looking at design as a social art. It's about people and making a context for human life that supports people, that gives people a leg up. So that's what we do.
On this day, the Institute hosted an open house featuring presentations on accessible designs around the world, showing possibilities for Boston's future development.
We still need to do better in places that people feel safe, where people feel like they belong, like I've been waiting for you and now you're here. You know, that's really what we want people to experience in urban public space.
The Institute deploys user experts to provide insight on the functionality, or lack thereof, of certain spaces. Taking what they learn, the Institute gives clients guidance on non-negotiable design standards, plus recommendations to enhance usability and move towards inclusive design. In practice, here's what it looks like. Dropped windows at the Spaulding Hospital on the Charlestown Navy Yard to allow people in wheelchairs to see out into the harbor. And at the Boston Architectural College in Back Bay, once the city's first combo police and fire station, an accessible entrance at the front of the building instead of in the back alley. Plus, flexible furniture, lighting, acoustics, and storage to meet the needs of the day, whatever they may be.
Where would we be with our $2,000 strollers if we didn't have curb cuts? We'd be nowhere. You know, how many places would be unworkable for bikes if we didn't have ramps and level entrances? We'd be nowhere. So really important that we respect that as a baseline, but man, it's a low base. If it works for people at the edges, it works better for all of us, because every one of us isn't the same every day. None of us are the same every day.
For a long time, you know, the poor blind guy, that's the way it was in the 1800s and, you know, going way, way back. But we proved that that's not what it is, and that's not what it is for most disabled folks, whatever disability they might have.
Welcome to the Perkins School for the Blind in Watertown, Massachusetts, a school Corey Cadlick once called home as a student and today has returned as its assistive technology manager.
Over the past 5-10 years, accessibility has become something of just a daily thing. It's no longer this afterthought. It happens sometimes still, sure. But now it's becoming what a lot of us had wanted it to be, which is built from the ground up.
On this day, Cadlick participated in Perkins' Assistive Technology Expo, which displayed tools like a multi-line digital braille device and a phone app that uses AI to read a photo description.
The picture shows a man with short hair wearing a black polo shirt. He appears to be indoors.
The Be My AI app helped Cadlick determine the color of the clothing he put on this morning instead of having to ask a neighbor for help.
Because my wife's blind, I'm blind, my kid's 16 months old. So I wouldn't have had the opportunity to get yelled at by my wife when I was picking my clothes out this morning, being like, you know, you should have done that last night. Like, yeah, I know. I'm a typical male, what do you want from me?
Cadlick says while technology has expanded accessibility tremendously in the last 10 years, there's still room to grow. But with AI, that growth is set to expand drastically.
And then self-driving vehicles. You know, that's, for me at least, that's huge. And that's going to happen. We're already there. It's just now AI is pushing that further. And there will be a day in the next probably 20 years, realistically, where I will have access to a car that I can get into and go somewhere without asking for a driver or whatever. And that's just amazing. And that's what I'm excited about. Also glasses. You know, glasses you put on your face and you have this idea of video, same thing, a video feed that's described to you. And that's, again, that's real. That's happening as we speak.
He hopes the rapidly changing digital landscape can prioritize accessibility, opening windows in both the online and the physical world. Its technology, Joycey says, has drastically improved her life and education.
I can use my phone to see signs from far away or read a menu that's up high. So advances in technology has made so many more things accessible for me as a blind and visually impaired person.
We need to find a way to eliminate the ideas of making things inaccessible so that when something is built, no matter what, it's accessible by default. The world's your oyster. There's nothing but up for you if you choose to.
But I felt, and I would think people with disabilities are often made to feel this shame around accommodations, right? This like, oh, you're being given this thing, or the rules are being bent for you, right? And then when I joined this community and I started doing this work and I learned that no, we have those rights because this community fought for them.
Killick, who has a neuromuscular impairment, says he and others have worked hard to build accessibility in every avenue for Bostonians. That includes pushing legislators to expand a languishing state housing voucher designed for people with disabilities under age 65 who are considered low income. He says their advocacy led the state to grow the program from a budgeted $3.5 million in 2013 to $24 million this past year, housing more than 1,000 people across the state. It's being used to transition people out of nursing homes and back into the community, and could be used to build new accessible housing. But Killick says it's incumbent upon everyone to close the gap.
Do a little bit of reading, do a little bit of homework on, think about, can people with disabilities be part of this event, part of this conversation, part of this space? And if they can't, think about what you could do to try and change that.
And advocates say those changes don't always have to be big things. Joycey says simple things like QR codes or large print menus at a restaurant make a very large difference.
You know, I'm speaking about that because that's what I know. But, you know, there's other ways to accommodate for other disabilities. Hi. You're a diva.
As a dynamic duo, Junie and Joycey are taking their can-do attitudes out into the city. They're interning with the MBTA, helping to analyze and expand accessibility for all. It's by doing this work, advocates like her can get back to the more pressing matters at hand.
We've discussed the debate, Starbucks versus Dunkin'. For Junie, it's Starbucks, if those are the only two. Otherwise, Cafe Nero. She loves Cafe Nero.